The galaxy was a vast place, filled with powerful alien species. Among them, the royal families of the most prominent planets often competed to show who was the strongest, who could claim dominance over others. Princess Illyra of the Elorians had always been on the outside. She wasn't the favorite daughter of the royal family, and she knew it. Her siblings were strong and fierce, each of them trained to lead with power and authority. But Illyra, in the eyes of many, was a disappointment. She lacked the sharpness and skill that made her brothers and sisters seem so perfect. The royal palace on Eloria was grand. With towering spires and gleaming marble walls, the halls were always filled with the sounds of bustling servants and the murmurs of political scheming. It was a place of wealth and power, a place where everything and everyone had a role to play, except for Illyra. To many, she was just another figurehead, a princess who couldn't live up to the expectations placed on her. No one seemed to notice her quiet intelligence or the gentle strength that hid beneath her calm exterior. Jake was a human soldier, part of the galactic peacekeeping force sent to protect the royal family on their diplomatic mission. He wasn't supposed to get involved in the politics of alien royalty. His job was simple: stand guard, follow orders, and keep his distance. He had heard rumors about the Elorian princesses, particularly about Illyra. Most people talked about her with disdain, calling her weak and insignificant. But Jake didn't believe everything he heard. His curiosity about her was piqued the moment he laid eyes on her. During one of the royal gatherings, Illyra stood alone in a corner of the grand hall, observing the bustling activity around her. She wasn't the center of attention like her siblings. They were busy with their duties, smiling for the cameras, greeting important guests. Illyra, however, remained quiet, lost in thought. There was something about her that intrigued Jake, something that made him want to know more. He watched her from across the room, noticing how her eyes seemed distant, as if she were looking beyond the walls of the palace, beyond the endless politics. Unlike the others, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. Jake saw something different in her, a kind of quiet strength. She wasn't trying to fit into the role everyone expected her to play. She was simply herself. As the evening wore on, the royal event began to wind down. Guests milled about, exchanging polite words and laughing at jokes. Jake's duty was nearly over, but something urged him to approach the princess. He knew he shouldn't, but the urge to speak with her felt overwhelming. He made his way through the crowd, his footsteps quiet on the polished floor. When he finally reached her, he didn't know what to say. He had never spoken to a royal before, especially not someone as important as a princess. But Illyra's gaze met his, and for a moment, the two of them stood in silence. "You seem out of place here," Jake said quietly, unsure of what else to add. Illyra's lips twitched into a small smile. "I suppose I do," she replied softly. "I've never quite fit into the mold that my family expects of me." Jake nodded, feeling an unexpected connection. "I get that," he said. "Sometimes it's hard to be who they want you to be." She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "You're not like the others, are you?" Jake chuckled softly. "No, I'm not. I'm just a soldier, here to do my job. No royal duties, no expectations, just a uniform and a mission." Illyra smiled again, this time with a little more warmth. "I envy that," she said. "A simple life, without the pressure to always be perfect." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the event continuing around them. For the first time, Illyra didn't feel like an outsider. Jake wasn't trying to impress her or use her for his own gain. He was just there, listening you. "Don't have to be perfect, you know," Jake said, his voice low but sincere. "You can be yourself." Illyra's eyes softened as she looked at him. "I wish it were that simple." Before Jake could respond, a loud voice interrupted them. One of Illyra's siblings, Prince Zale, approached with a group of nobles, his face filled with the familiar arrogance that Jake had grown to expect from royalty. Illyra immediately straightened, her shoulders stiffening. "Illyra," Zale said sharply, "Father wants to speak with you." "Now." Illyra nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'll be there in a moment," she replied quietly. Zale eyed Jake for a moment, his gaze cold, then turned and walked away. Jake could feel the tension. In the air, the silent judgment from Zale, but Illyra didn't seem to care. As the prince left, Illyra turned to Jake once more. "Thank you for the conversation," she said softly. "It's rare to have someone speak to me like a person, not a title." Jake gave her a nod. "Any time," he said with a smile, as Illyra walked away to fulfill her duties. Jake couldn't help but watch her go. He knew he was just a soldier, but there was something about her that he couldn't ignore. Something that made him believe she was more than just the least favored princess everyone thought she was. Later that night, as Jake prepared to leave the royal palace, he found himself thinking about Illyra again. She was different, yes, but not in the way others thought. She was more than just a quiet princess in the shadows of her siblings. She had a strength inside her that was impossible to ignore, and maybe, just maybe, Jake would get to see it for himself. Over the next few days, Jake and Illyra found themselves crossing paths more often. Jake was still on duty, ensuring the safety of the royal family. But every time he saw her, he couldn't help but be drawn to her calm presence. She was always surrounded by her family, yet there was an air of loneliness about her, as if she was isolated even in a crowd. Illyra had a quiet dignity about her, and Jake found himself watching her from a distance. She didn't seek attention the way her siblings did. Instead, she stayed mostly to herself, often deep in thought or quietly observing the events around her. It was clear to Jake that she didn't enjoy the power struggles of the royal court. She wasn't like her siblings, who fought for the spotlight. Illyra seemed content to stay out of the limelight, though Jake could see the sadness in her eyes whenever someone ignored her. One afternoon, as Jake stood guard near the palace gardens, he noticed Illyra walking alone among the flowers. The sun bathed the garden in warm light, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. She was so different here, away from the crowds, away from the expectations of her family. It was as if the garden was her sanctuary, a place where she could be herself, even if only for a short time. Jake decided to approach her. It was strange, but he felt as if he needed to talk to her, to learn more about the woman behind the royal title. Quietly, he walked toward her, careful not to disturb the peace of the moment. "Mind if I join you?" Jake asked, his voice gentle. "Why?" Illyra turned toward him, her eyes a bit surprised, but there was no hint of irritation. In fact, there was a softness in her gaze. "Not at all," she said, her voice quiet but welcoming. Jake stepped into the garden and stood beside her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke, content to simply enjoy the peaceful atmosphere. Birds sang from the trees, and the gentle rustling of leaves was the only sound that filled the air. Finally, Illyra broke the silence. "It's rare that I get any time to myself here," she said, glancing around. "My family is always so busy and everyone expects so much of me. Sometimes I wish I could just escape it all." Jake nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I can't imagine what it's like. You're constantly in the spotlight, surrounded by expectations." She sighed, her shoulders drooping slightly. "Yes, it's exhausting. I wonder if anyone sees me for who I really am instead of just the princess they want me to be." Jake met her gaze. "I see you," he said, his voice sincere. "I see you for who you are." Illyra's eyes softened at his words, and she gave him a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered. For the first time, Jake noticed the weight in her eyes, the quiet burden she carried. It wasn't just about her role as a princess. It was about the constant pressure to be perfect, to meet expectations that had been placed on her since birth. It was clear to Jake that Illyra had her own struggles, ones that went beyond the palace walls. They walked together through the garden, talking about everything and nothing. They spoke of simple things, the weather, the flowers, the stars, and for a brief moment, it felt like they were just two people, not a soldier and a princess. Jake realized that Illyra had a sharp mind, far sharper than most people gave her credit for. She spoke with insight and understanding, often surprising Jake with her observations. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Jake realized that he was enjoying their conversation more than he had expected. He had thought he was just protecting the princess, following orders. But now he couldn't deny the growing connection between them. Before long, they reached a quiet bench by the edge of the garden. They sat down, and Elira seemed to relax for the first time in a long while. She rested her hands in her lap, looking out at the horizon. "I never really asked you," Elira said, breaking the silence. "What made you decide to come here, to protect my family?" Jake smiled slightly. "I didn't have much choice, to be honest. I'm just a soldier, part of the galactic peacekeeping force. My job is to keep the peace, no matter where I go." But he hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much he wanted to reveal. "But I've seen a lot in my time, and something about this mission feels different. Maybe it's because of you." Lyra turned to face him, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Jake met her gaze, his words honest. "There's something about you. You don't seem like the others. You don't fit the mold they want. To put you in, you're not just a princess to be placed on a pedestal. You're more than that." Elira looked away for a moment, as if she were lost in thought. "I've always been told that my worth is based on my title, my family, and my power. But what if that's not enough?" She paused, her voice barely a whisper. "What if I'm not enough?" Jake reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gentle gesture of support. "You're enough, Elira. More than enough. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not to me, not to your family, not to the galaxy." Her eyes widened slightly at his words, and she took a deep breath, as if trying to steady herself. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. "No one has ever said that to me before." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. Jake didn't know what the future held, but in that moment he knew he had made the right choice. He had chosen to stand by her, not because of her title, because of who she was beneath the surface. Ylira. The princess who had been cast aside was stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and Jake had only just begun to see that strength. As the days passed, Jake's bond with Elira continued to grow stronger. He had always been a man of few words, but with her, it felt natural to talk. She didn't expect him to be anything other than himself, and that made their conversations easy. Whenever Jake was around, Elira seemed lighter, as if the weight of her title and her responsibilities didn't weigh so heavily on her shoulders. One evening, after another long day of royal duties and public appearances, Elira found herself once again alone in the palace garden. She had grown fond of these quiet moments, away from the noise and the people who only saw her as a princess to be groomed for marriage and power. Here in the garden, she could think, she could breathe, she could be herself. Jake had been on guard duty again, but he had been given some time off. He wandered through the garden, thinking of his next mission and the endless battles that lay ahead. His thoughts were interrupted when he spotted Elira sitting on a stone bench, her head tilted upward, gazing at the stars. He had seen her here before, but something about tonight felt different. There was an energy in the air, something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Decided to approach her again, hoping for another moment of peace in her company. "Mind if I join you?" Jake asked, his voice soft as he approached. Elira smiled at the sound of his voice, her eyes sparkling with a warmth that Jake had come to recognize. "Of course, Jake," she replied, her tone welcoming. He sat beside her, and for a while, they simply sat in silence, watching the stars twinkle above. The garden was peaceful, the air cool with the scent of jasmine and roses. It felt like the world outside the palace had faded away, leaving only the two of them and the quiet hum of the night. After a long while, Elira spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything." Had to look at her, sensing the weight in her words. "What's been on your mind?" Elira hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the stone bench. "I've spent my whole life trying to fit into the role my family created for me, trying to be the perfect princess, the perfect heir." She paused as if gathering her thoughts. "But sometimes I wonder if that's all I am, just a title, face in the crowd, a symbol of power." Jake didn't speak right away. He understood what she was saying. The pressure of being someone you weren't, of living up to others' expectations, was something he had felt in his own way as a soldier. The difference, of course, is that he had never been thrust into the spotlight like Elira. "You're not just a title, Elira," Jake said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "You're more than that. You're you." She looked at him, her expression softening. "You don't understand?" she said, shaking her head. "I've spent years hiding who I really am. There's so much more to me that no one knows. And I fear that if they ever found out, they would never look at me the same way." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Illyra took a deep breath, her eyes dropping to her hands as she spoke. "I have a power, Jake. A power that I've kept hidden for my whole life. It's part of who I am, but it's something I've learned to keep buried." Her voice trembled as she continued. "I've been told it's dangerous, that it's something I should never use." Jake was silent for a moment, processing her words. A power? What kind of power could a princess like Illyra have that was so dangerous? "Why have you kept it hidden?" Jake asked, his voice filled. With concern, Illyra turned her gaze back to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Because if I use it, I could destroy everything. I could destroy this palace, this planet, the entire galaxy." Jake stared at her, his mind racing. He had never seen this side of Illyra, the calm, controlled princess who always seemed so composed. Now, he was looking at someone who had been carrying an enormous burden, someone who was afraid of her own abilities. "I don't believe that," Jake said firmly, his voice steady. I don't think you'd ever destroy anything. You're not that kind of person." Illyra's expression faltered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You don't understand," she whispered. "The power I have is unlike anything you've ever seen. It's a force that can change everything. It can reshape reality itself." Jake took a step closer to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Illyra, whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone. I'm here for you." Her gaze softened at his words, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. Illyra took a deep breath, steadying herself before she spoke again. "Always been told that I should never reveal my true power, that it's too dangerous," she said softly. "But I think it's time for me to stop hiding. I can't keep pretending to be something I'm not." Jake nodded. "Whatever happens, I'll be right here with you." Illyra stood up, her movements slow but purposeful. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there was a new light in them. "I'm going to show you," she said, her voice steady. The air around them seemed to shift. A faint glow began to surround Illyra, radiating from her body like a soft light. Jake took a step back, his eyes wide in surprise. He had never seen anything like this before. Illyra raised her hands. With a soft gesture, the world around them seemed to warp. The trees in the garden began to sway, as if caught in an invisible breeze, the stars above flickering as if responding to her power. The very air hummed with energy. "This is who I am, Jake," Illyra said, her voice calm but filled with an undeniable strength. "This is my true self." Jake stood frozen, amazed by what he was witnessing. Illyra's power was beyond anything he could have imagined. It wasn't just the power to control elements or energies. It was as if she could bend the very fabric of the universe itself. She lowered her hands, and the light around her faded, leaving the garden still and quiet once again. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," she whispered, "but I think it's time to stop hiding." Jake stepped forward, his heart racing. "Illyra, that was incredible. But why hide it for so long?" Illyra met his gaze, her expression filled with both fear and determination. "Because I was afraid. I was afraid of what would happen if I let this power out. But now I'm ready." Jake reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." And for the first time, Illyra felt like she wasn't alone in the world. The weight of her secret had been lifted, and with Jake by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. This part focuses on Illyra revealing her true self to Jake, deepening their connection. It keeps the story engaging with emotional growth for both characters and is free of violated content. Let me know if you'd like any changes. In the days that followed Illyra's revelation, everything began to change. The power she had kept hidden for so long was no longer a secret, and the consequences of that knowledge were beginning to weigh heavily on her. Her family, once indifferent, to her now looked at her with a mixture of fear and fascination. Some saw her abilities as a tool to be used, while others, including her closest family members, feared what she might do with them. Jake had promised to stand by her, but now more than ever, he knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Illyra had been thrust into the spotlight, not as a quiet princess, but as someone with the potential to shape the very future of the galaxy. One evening, as the royal palace buzzed with tension, Illyra and Jake found themselves alone in one of the palace's private chambers. She had been summoned to a council meeting, but something in her expression told Jake that she was not eager to face what awaited her. He knew how difficult this must be for her. "You don't have to do this," Jake said, his voice soft. He was standing by the window, looking out at the stars that dotted the night sky. "If you don't want to go to that meeting, I'll be here. You don't have to prove anything." Illyra turned to him, her expression torn. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do, Jake. My family, they want me to use my power. They want to control it. But I can't just follow their orders. I have to do what's right, even if it means standing against them." Jake stepped closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've got to follow your own path, Illyra. You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for. You don't need to be anyone else's puppet. You're not just a tool for your family's ambitions." Her eyes softened, and for a moment she leaned into his touch. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "What if they turn on me? What if they see me as a threat instead of an ally?" Jake shook his head. "They won't, not if you don't let them. And if they do, I'll be here to protect you. You don't have to face this alone." Illyra looked up at him, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Jake. You're the only one who's ever believed in me." Before she could say more, a loud knock at the door interrupted their moment. "Ow!" The voice of one of her siblings called from the other side. "Princess Illyra, it's time for the council meeting. The family awaits." Illyra took a deep breath, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to face. She straightened up, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "I have to go," she said softly. Jake nodded, but he couldn't help but feel a twinge of worry. "I'll be right behind you. Don't let them push you around." With a final nod of gratitude, Illyra opened the door and stepped into the hallway, Jake following closely behind. As they walked toward the meeting room, Jake could feel the tension in the air. It was thick with uncertainty. He knew that the council would not take kindly to Illyra's new position. Inside the grand hall, the royal family had gathered, along with several high-ranking officials and diplomats from other planets. The room was filled with murmurs, the sound of hushed voices discussing the latest developments. When Illyra entered, all eyes turned toward her. Some faces showed admiration, others skepticism. Her power was no longer just a rumor. It was something they all had to reckon with. Illyra stood at the center of the room, her head held high, despite the nerves that threatened to consume her. She glanced at her siblings who sat at the table, their eyes filled with judgment. At the far end of the room, her father, the king, watched her closely, his expression unreadable. "Illyra," the king said, his voice low and commanding, "we need to discuss the future. Your power, as you know, is an asset. We can use it too. Secure our place in this galaxy, but only if you're willing to use it for the family's benefit." Illyra felt a wave of anger rising within her, but she kept it in check. She had always known that her father viewed her as a tool, a pawn, in his grand designs. But now, she wasn't the same quiet princess who had kept her power hidden. She wasn't going to let her father or anyone else control her. "I won't be used," Illyra said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I won't let my power be manipulated for your personal gain. I have my own path to follow, one that doesn't involve using people as pawns in your games." The room fell silent. Her siblings exchanged nervous glances, clearly unsure of how to respond. The king's face darkened, his eyes narrowing in displeasure. "You forget your place, Illyra," he said, his voice cold. "You are a princess, and your duty is to this family and to the galaxy. You are not free to make decisions on your own." Jake, who had been standing by the door, couldn't stand by any longer. He stepped forward, his voice firm as he spoke. Illyra is free to make her own choices. She's more than just a princess. She's a person with her own power, her own will. And if you can't respect that, then maybe you're the one who's forgotten your place. The room erupted in shock, and for a moment, no one knew how to respond. The king's gaze shifted to Jake, his expression darkening even further. You dare speak to me like that? The king hissed. Jake stood his ground, his eyes unwavering. I'm not afraid of you, your majesty, but I will protect Illyra no matter what. She's not alone anymore. The tension in the room was palpable. Illyra looked at Jake, a mix of emotions crossing her face. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was standing alone against the world. Jake had proven his loyalty to her, and she realized that no matter how the council reacted, she would no longer be swayed by their expectations. I've made my decision, Illyra said, her voice calm but filled with authority. I will not be controlled by fear or power. I will lead my own way. The king stared at her, his expression unreadable. He said nothing more, but Illyra could see the disappointment in his eyes. He had expected her to bend to his will, to use her power for his benefit. But she had chosen a different path, one that was her own. As the council meeting came to an end, Illyra felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time, she felt truly free. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but with Jake by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed the council meeting were tense. Illyra had made her decision, and though her family had been unhappy, she knew she couldn't go back. The weight of her new role was heavy, but it also filled her with a sense of purpose. For the first time in her life, she was truly choosing her own path. The power that had once been a secret was now a beacon of change, not only for her, but for the entire galaxy. Jake stood by her, supporting her every step of the way. The bond between them had grown stronger, not just because of their shared history, but because of the trust they had built. Illyra was no longer just the princess he was sworn to protect. She was someone he believed in, someone he cared for deeply. And though they had no idea what lay ahead, Jake knew one thing for certain: would face it with her, no matter the cost. As word of Illyra's new stance spread, so did the whispers of unrest. Her family, particularly her father, had not taken kindly to her refusal to follow their commands. Though she had not yet used her powers to their full extent, the mere knowledge of her abilities was enough to send shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Some saw her as a potential savior, while others viewed her as a dangerous threat. One evening, as Illyra sat in her private chamber, looking over the documents her advisors had brought her, the door opened slowly. Jake entered, his expression serious. Illyra, he said softly, there's something you need to know. Illyra looked up, her eyes meeting his. What is it? The galaxy is starting to divide, Jake said, stepping closer. Your family isn't the only one who's worried. There are factions in the galaxy that see your power as a threat, and they're gathering support. It's only a matter of time before they make their move. Illyra's heart sank as she realized the true weight of her decision. She had known that her actions would have consequences, but now it seemed like a full-scale conflict was on the horizon. What can we do? She asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We prepare. We fight if we have to. But you don't have to face this alone. We'll find a way to bring those who believe in you together. You have more allies than you realize. For the next several days, Illyra and Jake worked tirelessly to build support. They reached out to other leaders, other planets, offering a vision of unity and peace that went beyond the old way of doing things. Slowly but surely, they gathered a small but loyal group of followers and individuals who saw the potential in Illyra's leadership and the promise of a galaxy that could be united by strength, not fear. But not everyone agreed with Illyra's vision. The factions that feared her were growing bolder, and soon word came that a large fleet was moving toward Aloria. The ships were not allies. They were enemies, ready to fight for control of the galaxy and eliminate anyone who stood in their way. The news hit hard. The palace went into lockdown as preparations for war began. Lyra stood at the heart of it all, her mind focused on what had to be done. She knew that this wasn't just a fight for her family's throne. This was a fight for the future of the galaxy itself. "I never wanted this," Elira said one night as she and Jake stood in a war room, watching the enemy fleet approach. "I never wanted to be a part of a battle like this." Jake turned to her, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know. But you've already made a difference, Elira. You've shown the galaxy that there's another way when where power isn't the only answer. We can fight for what's right, not for control." Elira nodded, her resolve strengthening. "We can't let them destroy what we've started. We can't let them turn everything we've built into another cycle of violence and power struggles." Jake smiled at her, his confidence in her unwavering. "We won't. We'll fight together, just like we've been doing all along." The days that followed were filled with strategy meetings, training, and preparation. Elira had been trained for many things, but war was something different. Still, she had learned enough from her years of observing her family in the galaxy's power struggles. She knew how to lead, how to inspire, and how to make the tough choices when it mattered most. The night before the battle, as Elira stood on the palace balcony, looking out over the city, Jake joined her. The stars were shining brightly above them, and the night was calm, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. "Do you think we can win?" Elira asked quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Jake turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "I do. I believe in you, Elira, and I believe in us. Together we can change the galaxy." You looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Jake. I don't think I could do this without you." "You don't have to," he said with a smile. "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, the battle began. The enemy fleet arrived at Eloria, massive and menacing, but Elira and her allies were ready. They fought with everything they had, determined to protect the galaxy and prove that there was another way. Jake fought by her side, each of them taking on their respective roles. Elira, using her power, was able to control the flow of energy on the battlefield, shifting the tides of the fight. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader, a warrior, someone who had the courage to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. As the battle raged on, Elira and Jake's forces slowly began to gain the upper hand. The enemy, overwhelmed by the unexpected strength and unity of Elira's side, began to retreat. The tide of war was turning, and for the first time in a long while, Elira felt hope. The battle was not over, but the first victory had been won. And as Elira stood on the battlefield, her heart filled with both relief and determination. She knew that this was just the beginning. She had chosen her own path, and she would continue to fight for the galaxy's future, no matter what it took. This part shows Elira and Jake facing the growing conflict. With Elira stepping into her role as a leader in the battle for the galaxy, it builds excitement and sets the stage for future challenges while highlighting their growing partnership. "Let me know if you'd like any changes," asked ChatGPT. The battle had ended. The enemy fleet, once overwhelming, had retreated, leaving behind a sense of both victory and disbelief. The soldiers who fought under Elia's command celebrated, but the feeling was tempered by the knowledge that the galaxy's future was still uncertain. The first step had been taken, but there was much work left to do. Elira stood in the middle of the war room, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had seen what war did to people, how it tore families apart, how it destroyed cities, and how it left scars that lasted for generations. This victory, though important, was only one part of the larger struggle that lay ahead. Beside her, Jake watched as she studied the map of the galaxy spread out on the table. The symbols representing different planets and factions were still shifting, moving as the balance of power changed with each new decision. "You did it, Jake," said quietly, his voice filled with pride. "You led us to victory." Elira glanced at him, her expression tired but resolute. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "We all did this together." Jake smiled and gave her a supportive look. "You've shown the galaxy what you're capable of. You're more than just a princess, you're a leader." Elira sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I didn't want this. I never wanted to fight. I just wanted a world where people didn't have to live in fear." but now it seems like I can't escape it. Jake took a step closer to her, his voice soft. You're not alone. You've built something here. You've inspired people. And you've got people by your side who believe in you. I believe in you. Illyra met his gaze, and for a moment, the weight of the galaxy seemed to lift from her shoulders. Thank you, Jake. You've been with me from the start. I couldn't have done this without you. Jake shook his head. You're stronger than you think, Illyra. I'm just here to support you. She smiled, a small but genuine smile. I'm starting to believe that, she said softly. The next few days were filled with planning and discussions. The galaxy was still in turmoil, and there were many factions that had yet to be convinced that Illyra's vision of unity was the right path forward. Some planets had already pledged their support, others remained uncertain, unsure whether a new way of thinking could really bring peace to the galaxy. As the war room buzzed with activity, Illyra couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. She was no longer just a princess. She was the leader of a movement, a force for change in a galaxy that had been torn apart by endless conflict. It was a heavy burden, one that she hadn't asked for, but one she now had to carry. Jake noticed the shift in her demeanor. He could see the stress in her eyes, the uncertainty that lingered despite her outward confidence. He had been by her side through every battle. He could tell that this was the hardest challenge she had yet to face. You don't have to do this alone, Jake said. One evening, as they walked through the quiet halls of the palace, Illyra looked up at him, her expression weary. I know, but sometimes it feels like I'm the only one who can make the tough decisions. I don't want to let anyone down. You're not alone in this, Jake repeated. You have more allies than you realize, in the people you're fighting. For they believe in you. They trust you. Illyra stopped walking, turning to face him. Do you really think so? Jake nodded. I do. You've already shown them that there's another way. You've given them hope. Illyra took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. It's hard to believe in myself sometimes, but if others believe in me, maybe I can find the strength. To lead them? Jake smiled. You already are, and I'll be here with you every step of the way. For the next few weeks, Illyra and Jake continued to work together, reaching out to more planets and leaders, spreading the message of peace and unity. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments when it felt like their efforts might fail. But through it all, Illyra remained determined. She knew that the galaxy's future depended on the choices they made now. One day, yes. As Illyra stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the sun set over the city, Jake joined her. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the stars beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. Do you ever wonder what it will be like after all of this? Illyra asked, her voice thoughtful. Jake looked at her, his expression calm. What do you mean? When this is over, she said. When the galaxy is at peace, what will it look like? Will we have changed things for the better? Or will we just be stuck in the same cycle of power and control? Jake paused, his gaze focused on the horizon. I think we'll find a new way. One where people don't have to fight for what's right. But it won't happen overnight. It'll take time, and it'll take all of us working together. Illyra nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and doubt. I hope you're right. I want to believe that the galaxy can be better. I want to believe that we can make a real difference. You already have, Jake said, his voice filled with conviction. You've shown the galaxy that there's another way. You've given people hope. And that's more than anyone else has ever done. Illyra smiled softly, her heart lighter than it had been in days. Maybe you're right. Maybe we can change the galaxy, after all. As they stood there, side by side, looking out over the city, Illyra realized that her journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, battles to fight, and choices to make. But she no longer felt like the least favored princess, someone who had to hide her true self. She had found her purpose, and with Jake by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The future was uncertain. But one thing was clear. Illyra was no longer alone, and she was ready to fight for the galaxy's future, just as she had fought for her own. This part shows Illyra's continued growth as a leader and the ongoing journey of peace. It highlights her connection with Jake and the hope they share for a better future. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments.